Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Veils. Tonight's tale begins with something small, something delicate, something that should have stayed buried at a silver pendant, discovered beneath a rose bush in Miss Marple's own garden. Its chain snapped, its surface scratched, and inside, a photograph of a woman no one in St. Mary Mead seems to recognize. But the moment Miss Marple picks it up, the air changes. Old secrets stir, conversations halt, and the village, usually warm and familiar, suddenly feels watchful because this pendant didn't fall. It was hidden by someone who hoped it would never be found, and who might do anything to keep the past from rising again. Chapter 1: Secrets Beneath the Leaves. It was a cold, misty morning in St. Mary Mead. The kind of chill that seeped into the bones and made even the hardiest villagers pull their coats tightly around their shoulders. The mist clung to the hedges and curling branches, curling along the narrow lanes like smoke from an unseen fire. Miss Marple preferred mornings like these for her walks. There was a stillness to the village at dawn, a hush that allowed her mind to wander and notice the smallest of details, the subtleties that most people overlooked. It was in these quiet moments, she often thought, that the truth revealed itself. This morning, as she made her way along the path winding past the old rector's garden, her eyes caught a faint glimmer among the damp, decaying leaves. Something was out of place. Kneeling carefully on the soft soil, Miss Marple brushed the leaves aside, revealing a small, golden pendant. Its chain was thin, delicate, and the locket itself was a tiny marvel of craftsmanship. Intricate patterns, once crisp, were now smoothed and worn by time, giving it an appearance both fragile and timeless. Miss Marple picked it up, turning it over in her hands. The clasp had been broken once and mended, clumsily, but still securely enough to hold the two halves together. She could feel a subtle warmth emanating from the gold, as if it had been held, perhaps even carried, not long ago. The pendant was far too fine to belong to a child. It was not merely a decorative trinket. There was intent behind it, a purpose, though what that might be, she did not yet know. Her gaze swept the garden. No footprints marred the soft earth, except her own. The shed door stood firmly closed, the windows of the rector's house dark and silent. No one had been there. And yet, this pendant had arrived. How and why remained a puzzle. Miss Marple's mind, ever alert, began to catalog possibilities. Was it a gift accidentally dropped? Unlikely. A warning, a message, a marker? Much more probable. Miss Marple had long learned that objects left behind were rarely accidental. They carried intention, a story waiting for someone patient enough to uncover it. She slipped the pendant into her pocket, careful to avoid disturbing it further. With measured steps, she retraced her path toward the village. The mist thickened as she walked, curling around her legs and masking the familiar path ahead. The usual morning noises of the village, the baker setting out loaves, the clatter of a milk cart, were subdued, muffled under the gray blanket of fog. Even the distant barking of a dog seemed hesitant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By the time she reached her own garden gate, Miss Marple was already thinking ahead. The pendant, she decided, needed careful examination. First, she would seek the counsel of her neighbors, not to rush them into action, but to observe their reactions, their impressions. Then, if necessary, she would alert the authorities. Yet even as she thought this, a quiet instinct whispered that the true meaning of the pendant could not be unearthed through official channels alone. Someone, somewhere, had left it deliberately, and their intention was far from innocent. Sitting by the fire in her sitting room, Miss Marple took the pendant from her pocket and examined it in the warm lamplight. The chain glinted, the tiny engravings catching the glow. With gentle fingers, she opened the locket. Inside lay a small photograph, a portrait of a young woman. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear, her lips curved in a tentative, almost sorrowful smile. On the back, written in careful script, was a name and a date. The name was unfamiliar, yet the date immediately drew Miss Marple's attention. It had not yet arrived. The handwriting was deliberate, practiced, almost clinical in its precision, as if meant to convey something beyond mere identification. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. The pendant was not just a keepsake. It was a signal. But from whom? And for what purpose? The warmth she had felt earlier was no trick of perception. It was a subtle, tangible reminder that someone, somewhere, had been here recently. Someone had placed this pendant in the garden with intent. And now, Miss Marple held it in her hands. Her thoughts drifted to the villagers. Could any of them be involved? Mrs. Bantry had always been protective of her family and her secrets, but she was unlikely to send a message in this manner. The Reverend's household had its quiet scandals, but nothing ever ventured into danger. And yet, the pendant suggested urgency. A hidden thread pulling unseen at the fabric of the village's apparent calm. She remembered a conversation from the previous week with a neighbor. An elderly woman who had remarked on the strange movements around the abandoned mill house at the edge of the village. Miss Marple had dismissed it lightly at the time, attributing it to gossip and the natural exaggerations of age. But now she wondered, was there a connection between the mill house and the pendant? The photograph's anxious expression seemed to hint at a story, a warning that someone had meant for her to discover. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, the fire casting flickering shadows across her thoughtful face. She considered the possibilities. Perhaps it was the beginning of a tale long buried, a secret waiting to emerge from the past. Perhaps it was an echo of a crime that had gone unnoticed, a thread left dangling for someone meticulous and patient to follow. The pendant was small, but its presence was monumental. Hours passed. The mist outside thickened, pressing against the window panes, wrapping the village in silence. Miss Marple moved the locket to her desk, alongside her notebook. She made careful observations, noting every detail: the wear on the chain, the patterns of the engraving, the warmth of the gold, and the photograph within. Every aspect, she knew, could carry meaning. A misplaced curl in the hair, the angle of the eyes, the careful script on the back. All were pieces of a puzzle yet to be solved by nightfall. Miss Marple had resolved on her next steps. She would visit those who might know something of the young woman in the photograph, asking subtle questions, watching reactions, listening for hesitation or surprise. She would not reveal the full nature of her discovery, for too much attention could spoil the delicate balance of secrecy the pendant had initiated, and yet, she could not entirely suppress the feeling of unease. Someone had placed the pendant here for a reason. Someone was waiting, watching, perhaps even anticipating her discovery. There was urgency in the object's presence, and a quiet threat woven into its delicate gold. Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with caution. A mystery had begun, one that would unravel slowly, methodically, like a tightly wound thread slowly pulled from the spool that she prepared for bed. The pendant safely on her bedside table, Miss Marple studied the photograph one last time. The young woman's eyes seemed to follow her, wide and expectant, as if asking silently, "Will you discover the truth before it is too late?" The locket was no ordinary trinket. It was a call to action, an invitation to uncover a secret that someone had tried desperately to conceal. And Miss Marple, as she often did in moments like these, accepted the silent challenge. Chapter 2. The Secret of the Mill House. The morning after discovering the pendant, Miss Marple rose earlier than usual, the chill of dawn pressing against the windows of her small, tidy cottage. Even in the warmth of her kitchen, the air felt sharp and alive, carrying a faint scent of damp leaves and frost. She poured herself a cup of tea, her thoughts already wandering to the mysterious locket she had found in the rector's garden. The photograph within it haunted her, a young woman's anxious eyes, the precise handwriting, and the date that had not yet arrived. Who was she? And why had someone left this message, so carefully hidden among the autumn leaves? Miss Marple decided to begin her investigation with the Mill House, the long-abandoned building at the edge of the village that had always seemed to harbor its own secrets. It had been empty for decades, its windows shuttered, its walls sagging with age. Children whispered tales of ghosts and strange happenings, and villagers avoided it unless absolutely necessary. But Miss Marple was not deterred by superstition. She approached the place with the deliberate patience that had solved so many mysteries before. She wrapped a thick scarf around her neck and set out, walking briskly along the narrow lane that led to the mill house. The mist had not lifted from the village, and as she walked, it clung to her coat and hair, lending a ghostly quality to the path ahead. By the time she reached the edge of the field where the mill house stood, the building loomed through the fog, dark and silent. Its windows, grimy with dust and neglect, reflected nothing of the world outside. Even the faintest sound seemed swallowed by the stillness. Miss Marple approached cautiously, her sharp eyes noting every detail. The gate to the property hung slightly ajar, creaking on its hinges with the slightest breeze. The path leading to the front door was overgrown with weeds, the garden wild and untamed. Yet she noticed signs that someone had been here recently, a faint impression in the soil near the porch, as if a small object had been dropped or left behind. Her pulse quickened. Could it be connected to the pendant? The door was locked, as she had expected. Miss Marple tapped lightly on the wood, listening for any response. When none came, she circled the building, inspecting the side and back entrances. At the rear, a small window was slightly open, its latch old but serviceable. With careful maneuvering, she lifted herself just enough to peer inside. The room was empty, save for a layer of dust on the floor and a few broken pieces of furniture. Yet, there was evidence someone had been here recently. A footprint in the dust, faint and deliberate, leading toward the corner where a small, worn table Saturday. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She entered the house carefully, taking slow, measured steps. The air was musty, tinged with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet seemed amplified in the silence. She approached the table and inspected it closely. Beneath a stack of old newspapers, she discovered something that made her breath catch. A torn piece of fabric, golden in color, with traces of delicate embroidery. It matched the pendant she had found in the garden. Her mind raced. Someone had been here, someone who had placed the pendant among the leaves and left a trace, perhaps expecting it to be found. But who and why? Miss Marple knew better than to make assumptions. Every detail mattered. The angle of the window left ajar, the placement of the fabric, even the faint footprint in the dust. It was all part of a careful design, a silent message waiting for an observant eye to interpret. Hours passed as she examined the mill house from top to bottom. There was no sign of recent habitation beyond the small clues she had discovered. No food, no signs of a fire, nothing to suggest that someone had been living here continuously. Yet, the pendant and the fabric piece indicated that someone had visited, deliberately leaving a trail for her to find. Miss Marple was no stranger to puzzles of this nature. She knew that the presence of a single object, left with intention, could unravel layers of hidden truths. Returning home, she resolved to question the villagers carefully. She began with Mrs. Bantry, who had always kept a sharp eye on the comings and goings of St. Mary Mead. Mrs. Bantry greeted her warmly, but Miss Marple noticed a faint hesitation in her voice when she asked casually if anyone had been near the mill house recently. A pause, almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest knowledge, or at least suspicion. Next, she visited the local grocer and the postman, both of whom had their own small observations to share. A visitor seen at odd hours, a carriage leaving in the dead of night, a child who had wandered too close to the mill house and returned with stories of strange shadows. Each piece was small, Yet together they formed a mosaic that hinted at hidden activity. Miss Marple made careful notes, piecing together what others might dismiss as trivial gossip. As evening fell, Miss Marple returned home, her mind alive with theories. She spread her notes across the table, alongside the pendant and the photograph, examining the connections. The photograph's date, still in the future, was the most perplexing clue. Was it a deadline, a warning, or a marker of some event yet to come? Whoever had left the pendant intended for her to notice the date, to recognize its significance. Night descended on St. Mary Mead, thick fog enveloping the village in an eerie silence. Miss Marple sat by the fire, the flickering light reflecting in her keen eyes. She thought about the young woman in the photograph, about the fabric piece and the footprints at the mill house. Someone had been orchestrating this, guiding her gently but firmly toward a truth that was carefully concealed. Miss Marple understood the importance of patience. She would not act hastily. The pendant, the mill house, the date, they were all threads in a web, and pulling too hard could ruin the pattern. She needed to wait, observe, and unravel the story carefully. But beneath her calm exterior, a quiet thrill surged. The game had begun, and she was fully aware of the stakes. In the middle of the night, she awoke suddenly, a faint sound disturbing the otherwise complete silence of her home. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a soft creak, like someone moving carefully outside. She listened intently, every sense alert. The pendant lay on the bedside table, catching the moonlight through the window. Its golden surface seemed to glow faintly, as though resonating with the tension in the air. Miss Marple did not move immediately. She waited, letting her mind analyze, consider, and anticipate. The sound passed, leaving only the silence of the night. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. Whoever was out there, whoever had left the pendant, knew that someone was paying attention. The stakes were rising, and the game was no longer just about curiosity. It had become a matter of understanding a plan that stretched beyond the village. Beyond the immediate evidence before her by morning, Miss Marple had resolved her next steps. She would revisit the mill house with careful preparation, observe the surrounding area without drawing attention, and perhaps discover additional clues that would clarify the meaning of the pendant. The young woman in the photograph, the date, the deliberate placement of objects, all hinted at a story far more complex than she had first imagined. Miss Marple prepared for the day with a sense of quiet determination. The mystery had deepened, the tension thickened like the fog that still clung stubbornly to the village lanes. Every sound, every movement, every reaction of those around her could hold significance, and she would watch, patiently, meticulously, until the hidden truth revealed itself. By afternoon, she was ready. With a small satchel containing a notebook, the pendant carefully wrapped in soft cloth, and a pair of binoculars, she set out toward the mill house again. The village remained largely silent, the few passers-by giving her only fleeting glances. Miss Marple moved with purpose, yet with discretion, fully aware that the mystery she was pursuing was not idle curiosity, but a carefully orchestrated challenge set before her by someone with knowledge, intent, and possibly danger. As she approached the mill house, she noticed subtle changes from the previous day. The path seemed more worn in some places, faint signs of disturbance in the grass. She crouched and examined them carefully. A recent footprint, distinct and deliberate, led toward the rear of the property. Someone had been there, and they knew she would come. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The game had shifted. It was no longer just about discovery, but about anticipation, understanding, and the careful pursuit of truth. Miss Marple stood, examining the building through her binoculars. The windows remained dark, the silence unbroken. Yet she knew that somewhere inside, or nearby, the next clue awaited, poised to reveal itself to those patient enough to notice. She felt the pendant in her pocket, a warm weight against her hand. a constant reminder that the mystery was alive, pulsing, and urgent. Her mind turned again to the photograph, to the date that had not yet arrived, and to the deliberate, silent orchestration that had brought her here. Whoever had left the pendant had not anticipated haste or impatience. They had left a puzzle, a thread, and Miss Marple knew that the careful following of it would unravel secrets buried deep. Secrets that might shake the quiet village to its foundations, and Miss Marple, patient, observant, relentless, was ready. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Soil. The morning light crept slowly across St. Mary Mead, painting the rooftops in pale gold. Yet the warmth of the rising sun did nothing to ease the tension that had settled over Miss Marple's thoughts. She had barely slept. The slightest whisper of movement outside her cottage last night had lingered in her mind like an unfinished sentence. Someone had been there. Someone who knew she held the pendant. Someone who feared, or expected, what she might discover next. She stood at her kitchen window, watching the mist drift across her small garden. The pendant lay on the table behind her, the photograph inside still staring upward with those anxious, pleading eyes. The date written on the back hovered in her thoughts like a storm cloud. It was today. Miss Marple understood the meaning immediately. Something was going to happen, and she had little time left to find the truth. She dressed, gathered her small satchel, and placed the pendant carefully inside. If the answers lay anywhere, they would be at the mill house. Every clue pointed to that silent structure, standing at the village's edge like a forgotten sentinel. Whoever had been leaving traces intended her to return, and she would, calmly, patiently, and with the resolve that had served her through countless mysteries. As she stepped outside, the chill of the early air clung to her coat. The village was unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed hesitant, as though sensing the weight of the day. Miss Marple walked steadily, not rushing, but with a focused purpose. Her shoes clicked softly on the cobblestones, each step echoing in the stillness. When she reached the field bordering the mill house, she paused. Something was different that a narrow trail of footprints marked the morning dew, leading directly to the old building. Not the faint, uncertain prints she had seen before. These were fresh, clear. Someone had gone inside recently, perhaps minutes ago. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her satchel and followed. The mill house loomed through the fog, its walls streaked with age, its windows cold and dull. But a single thing stood out. The front door was open, just slightly. A breath of cold air drifted out, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and decay. Miss Marple pushed the door gently with the tip of her fingers that it creaked open. The room inside was dim, lit only by the pale light seeping through cracks in the shutters. Dust floated in the air like silent snow. But the stillness she expected was broken. Someone was there. A man stood near the far wall, half in shadow. Tall, with a rigid posture and hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly as she stepped. Inside, his eyes sharp, assessing her with an unsettling calm. Miss Marple knew him, not personally, but from whispers. His name was Henry Cole. He had grown up in the village, left abruptly as a young man, and returned rarely. His family had owned the mill house before it was abandoned. Rumors circled him, like flies. Arguments with his late father, a vanished younger sister, and a troubled past no one dared discuss openly. He looked at Miss Marple with a quiet intensity. "You found it," he said. His voice was steady, but strained. "The pendant," Miss Marple replied softly. "Yes, I found it yesterday morning." He exhaled, almost relieved. "Then you know why you're here." Miss Marple returned his gaze calmly. "I know enough to understand the young woman in the photograph is important, and that today's date matters." Henry Cole stepped closer, the dim light revealing the exhaustion etched in his features. "She's my sister," he said. "The photo was taken just before she disappeared. Everyone assumed she ran away, but I knew she didn't. I knew something had happened." Miss Marple listened intently, her expression steady. "She visited this house the night she vanished. Henry continued, voice trembling slightly. I found the pendant here, buried under a loose floorboard. And I found her journal, or what remained of it. Pages torn out, words scratched. Someone had been here with her. He swallowed hard. And I believe she never left this house. Miss Marple felt a chill crawl across her spine that a terrible possibility unfolded before her as Henry moved to a corner of the room. He knelt and pulled aside a rotting board. Beneath it lay a patch of disturbed earth, darker than the soil around it, soft, as though recently uncovered. I could never bring myself to dig it up alone, he whispered. But when you found the pendant, I thought maybe, just maybe, you could help me face the truth. Miss Marple knelt beside him. Her hands were steady despite the weight of the moment. Together, in silence, they began to remove the upper layer of soil that it didn't take long that a small wooden box appeared beneath the dirt. Weathered. Old. Its lid warped with moisture, but intact. Henry's breath trembled as he lifted it out, his fingers shaking. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on his arm, grounding him. Open it, she said softly. He did. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, lay the remains of a young woman's belongings. Hair ribbons, a small silver brooch, a torn piece of her dress. And beneath them, a letter. The paper was brittle, its ink faint. Henry unfolded it with trembling hands. Miss Marple read over his shoulder. The words were simple, that I am not leaving. I am afraid. He knows I found his records. If anything happens to me, please tell someone. Please find me. Miss Marple's breath caught. He, she murmured. Do you know who she meant? Henry nodded slowly, jaw clenched. The man who owned the mill house after my father sold it. A collector of sorts. He kept ledgers, records of valuables, antiques, and people who owed him debts. I think my sister discovered something he didn't want her to. Miss Marple looked at him gently. And when he realized she knew, he silenced her. Henry finished bitterly. And buried the truth here. He stood suddenly, anger and grief twisting his voice. But he died years ago. He never faced justice. Not a day. Miss Marple rose with him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. She left clues. Miss Marple said softly. Enough for you to find her. Enough for the truth to rise. Henry looked down at the box, tears slipping silently down his face. And enough for her story to finally be told. Miss Marple nodded. Justice takes many forms, she said. But truth always finds its way to the surface. Henry closed the box gently. We should take this to the authorities. They will listen now. With this, they must. Miss Marple agreed. Together, they walked out of the mill house, leaving behind decades of silence. The mist lifted slightly as they stepped into the field, as though even the morning understood the weight that had been lifted. As they walked back toward the village, Miss Marple felt the pendant warm inside her pocket. She knew it would no longer haunt her thoughts. It had fulfilled its purpose. A voice. A warning. A plea for truth. And truth had answered. If you enjoyed this dark and haunting Miss Marple mystery, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling story. Your support helps keep these mysteries alive. More suspense, more secrets, more stories awaiting you in the next case.